The courtroom in downtown Denver was packed. Wooden benches creaked beneath reporters, spectators, and legal teams as they shifted restlessly in their seats. The air was thick with anticipation, and the cameras positioned behind the last row of benches glared silently, waiting to capture what everyone was calling a historic moment. Security stood at every corner, more alert than usual, though their eyes often darted toward the child seated near the front, a small girl in a pale yellow dress, no older than 9, clutching a stuffed bear. Her name was Emily Carter. She was about to testify in one of the most controversial internal trials in state history, not against a man, at least not directly. She was expected to speak about a dog. Not just any dog, but a retired police canine named Rex, known throughout Colorado for his years of service with Officer Ryan Daniels. The title of the case seemed surreal: State versus Daniels, misconduct, abuse of power, and use of force via K-9. What shocked people most wasn't just the nature of the charges, but who was sitting across from the defendant. A little girl, barely tall enough to see over the table, was about to tell the world what had happened that night. And the key witness, ironically, was also in the room, wagging his tail. Rex sat beside his new handler, a woman from the department's rehabilitation unit. His black and tan coat gleamed under the courtroom lights, his ears perked and eyes alert, as if he could sense the tension. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply watched. Judge Hamilton, known for his no-nonsense demeanor, entered the courtroom and called everyone to order. The chatter silenced. The gavel struck once, echoing like a warning shot. The trial had begun. Prosecutor Linda Merrow stood first. A woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, she began laying out the case. A late-night police raid, an innocent family traumatized, and a decorated officer accused of turning his partner, Rex, into a silent enforcer of fear. Her voice remained steady as she recounted the details. Officer Daniels had allegedly ordered Rex to stay still, not to intervene. During what was supposed to be a high-risk drug raid, there were no drugs, no weapons, just a terrified family, including a little girl who remembered everything. The defense, led by Charles Bennett, argued back swiftly. Ladies and gentlemen, Rex is a police dog, trained to obey, trained to protect, and above all, to follow orders. And Officer Daniels, with a clean record and commendations, did what he thought was right under a tense situation. Gasps and murmurs followed his words. Was it really right to silence a dog meant to defend? What about the girl? Emily sat quietly, feet not quite reaching the floor. Her mother sat behind her, hands wringing nervously. Emily didn't speak. Not yet. Her time would come. Officer Daniels, seated beside his lawyer, looked composed. Too composed, some would later say. He occasionally glanced toward Rex, though the dog never returned the gaze. Perhaps Rex no longer recognized him. Or perhaps he remembered all too well. The room stirred again as the court bailiff called for a break before Emily's testimony. Everyone stood as the judge exited, but Emily stayed in her seat, her hands still wrapped around her bear. A journalist whispered, "She doesn't look scared at all." But those closest could see her knuckles whiten. When the court resumed, the judge nodded toward Emily's attorney. "Call your witness." Emily was escorted to the stand, her steps small but deliberate. A microphone was adjusted to her height. She didn't need it. She was sworn in, her voice quiet but clear. The attorney approached gently. "Emily, do you remember what happened that night?" She nodded. "Yes, I remember everything." "And do you recognize the dog in this courtroom?" Emily's eyes locked onto Rex. For a second, the room held its breath. "Yes," she said. "That's him. That's Rex." The attorney paused. Did he hurt you? No, she said softly. But he didn't help me either. The words stunned everyone. A low murmur crept through the crowd. The attorney leaned in. Can you explain? What you mean? Emily clutched her bear tighter. Her next words, though spoken in a child's voice, carried the weight of a thunderclap. I thought police dogs were heroes. I thought they were supposed to protect people. But that night, he just stood there. He watched Officer Daniels scream at my mom. He watched him push me, and he didn't bark. He didn't stop him. He didn't even move. The courtroom went completely silent. Even the clicking of the reporter's keyboard stopped. Then she looked directly at the judge. If he's a hero, why didn't he protect me? The judge froze. Jurors looked at each other with confusion and sorrow. A few mouths opened, but no sound came out. The chilling simplicity of her question shook them to their core. And that was just the beginning. Before the courtroom spotlight, before the cameras and microphones, there was a quiet street with modest houses and picket fences. It was in one of those homes, in a neighborhood that rarely made the news, where the raid took place. Emily Carter had lived there with her mother, Sandra, and her older brother, Jordan. Her father had passed away 2 years earlier, leading the family to rebuild their lives piece by piece. On the night, everything changed. Emily had been coloring on the living room floor, while Sandra folded laundry in the kitchen. It was peaceful almost. Too peaceful, considering what would follow. Just after 9 p.m., the front door burst open without warning. Flashlights beamed into their eyes. Shouts filled the house. Emily barely had time to react before heavy boots stomped through their living room, and an officer with a K-9 unit ordered them to the ground. It wasn't just the chaos that scared Emily. It was the coldness, the precision, the way the officers treated their home like a war zone. And right there, in the middle of it, was Rex. The big German shepherd stood at the edge of the room, muscles tensed, eyes watching, but not barking, not moving. Not once did he act like the fierce protector children read about in books. I thought he would help us, Emily later said. I thought dogs were good. Officer Daniels had taken the lead. He pointed at Sandra and demanded to know where the stash was hidden. When she asked what they were talking about, Daniels shoved a vase from the table. Emily screamed. Jordan, who had just stepped out of the bathroom, was pinned to the wall before he could speak. But even in the panic, it wasn't the yelling or the threats that Emily remembered most. It was the silence of the dog. Rex, the police hero, didn't respond to the fear in the room. He didn't growl. He didn't try to intervene. He simply watched, obeyed, and that made it worse. The raid lasted only 12 minutes. No weapons were found. No drugs. Just a single family, traumatized and confused, sitting in their wrecked home. Daniels didn't offer an apology. He called it a false lead and left without another word. Rex walked out behind him, still. Silent, still loyal. That night, Emily wouldn't sleep. Her mother sat on the edge of her bed, wiping away her tears, unsure how to explain what had happened. It was a mistake, Sandra whispered. They had the wrong house. But Emily didn't buy it. She'd seen how Daniels looked at them. He hadn't looked sorry. The days that followed were filled with nightmares, flashbacks, and panic. Jordan began skipping school. Sandra filed a complaint with the department, but was told an investigation would take some time. Weeks turned into months. It was only when a neighbor's doorbell camera footage went viral showing the aggression and the terrified screams that the department finally responded. Daniels was placed on temporary leave. Rex, by association, was also retired from active duty. The footage raised questions, but it was Emily's statement that broke everything open. She told a child psychologist, then her school counselor, and finally an attorney. The officer told the dog not to bark, "I heard it," he said. "Stay quiet. Let me handle this." And the dog listened. That small detail became the backbone of the entire legal case. If Daniels had used Rex not for defense, but for fear, if he had trained the dog to remain passive during excessive force, it could be considered abuse of authority and a violation of departmental protocols. The media latched onto the story. A once beloved officer and his celebrated dog were now at the center of public scrutiny. Investigators found more troubling things. Rex's training records had been altered. His behavior tests showed signs of hesitation during aggression simulations, red flags that were signed off as minor by Daniels himself. There had even been complaints filed by other officers, claiming Daniels used the dog to scare civilians during arrests. Those reports had been buried. For Sandra Carter, it wasn't about headlines. It was about protecting her daughter. Emily had changed since that night. She no longer smiled the same way. She flinched at loud sounds. She couldn't be alone in a room without a light on. Something had been taken from her. Not just peace, but trust. When the lawsuit was filed, the department tried to settle quietly. They offered compensation, even therapy. But Sandra said no. She wanted accountability. She wanted people to hear her daughter's voice. And so the trial began. Back in the courtroom, as the legal teams argued, Emily sat in her chair with a surprising calmness. She wasn't just a witness. She was a survivor. And Rex? He was no longer the villain in her mind. In her heart, she knew the truth. The dog wasn't bad. He had just followed the wrong man. Emily had told her therapist something no one expected. "I think Rex wanted to help, but he was scared too." It wasn't just a child's innocence. It was clarity. Maybe the dog wasn't the symbol of power. Maybe he was the reflection of it. A loyal creature trained to obey, even when it was wrong. As part 2 of the trial closed, the courtroom began to shift. Jurors leaned forward. Reporters stopped searching for sound bites and began listening. This wasn't a simple case of right and wrong. It was something deeper. It was about obedience without conscience, silence used as a weapon, and the cost of blind loyalty. And the smallest voice in the room had started to expose it all. Rex had always been a star in the eyes of the department. His name was mentioned in press releases. His picture proudly displayed at police fundraising events. Children wore stickers with his paw print, and local schools invited him for safety demonstrations. He had a medal for bravery after chasing down a robbery suspect who tried to flee across the rooftops. In public, he was more than a dog. He was a symbol. But behind the uniform and the commands was something no one had dared question until Emily spoke up. What had Rex really been trained to do? While the defense continued painting Rex as a loyal, disciplined service dog, prosecutors started pulling records. The deeper they dug, the more inconsistencies emerged. Rex's training logs were filled with check marks and signatures, but very little detail. Officer Daniels had apparently overseen much of Rex's behavior assessments himself, sometimes without another trainer present. That alone raised eyebrows. But one incident, hidden deep in archived files, stood out. A former cadet had once filed an anonymous report stating that Daniels used Rex as a deterrent during interrogations. According to the report, suspects were made to sit with the dog just inches away, unmuzzled, during questioning, even when there was no sign of violence. It was never proven, and the report was buried. But now, in light of Emily's testimony, that claim began to resurface with new weight. Then came the footage, grainy but undeniable. The department had reluctantly turned over body cam videos from unrelated arrests, hoping they'd help Daniels. But they had the opposite effect. Several clips showed Daniels ordering Rex to stay down, even as situations escalated. In one, an unarmed teenager was shoved to the ground by Daniels, and Rex merely stood still, ears flat, following orders without reacting. "Stay. Don't move. Let me handle this," Danielle said in one clip. The same phrase Emily had remembered. That consistency, from a child's memory to an officer's own voice caught on tape, sent a shockwave through the courtroom. People had expected the trial to focus on whether Daniels had gone too far during one mistaken raid. But now it looked like a pattern. A deliberate one dot at the end of the third day in court. An animal behaviorist named Dr. Helen Briggs was called to the stand. She had reviewed Rex's training footage and behavioral tests. Her findings were not what anyone expected. Rex is not aggressive, she said, but he is highly obedient to specific voice cues. If those cues are used inappropriately, the dog will not react, even if his instincts tell him something is wrong. "So you're saying he was trained not to protect?" the prosecutor asked. "I'm saying," Dr. Briggs replied, "that he was trained not to think, only to follow." There was a stunned silence. Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer whispered something urgently, but Daniels didn't respond. His hands were clenched, his face still, but clearly unsettled. Rex sat across the room, his body calm, but eyes scanning. He seemed to sense the energy shifting. Even the jury, once hesitant to judge a decorated officer or a police dog, now looked more focused, more suspicious. The image of the fearless, faithful K9 was being peeled away piece by piece. Outside the courthouse, protest signs began to appear. Some supported the police. Others held posters of Emily and the words, "She asked the question we all should." Reporters began calling it the Rex Reckoning. Social media was flooded with posts debating whether police dogs were heroes or tools, and whether loyalty without conscience was really loyalty at all. Back in the courtroom, Daniels was called to testify. His voice, once confident and commanding, now wavered slightly. "Rex was my partner," he said. "We worked side by side for years. I would never harm him or anyone else without reason." But then came the follow-up. "Did you ever train Rex to remain passive, even during forceful arrests?" Daniels hesitated. "I trained him to obey, even if that obedience allowed harm to come to others." Another pause. "I did what I was trained to do," he said finally. The courtroom seemed to collectively exhale, but the damage was done. Those weren't the words of a man in control. They were the words of a man who had lost his grip on his own narrative. That night, the prosecution received a surprising call. A former K9 handler from another precinct had seen the trial on the news. She shared details of her experience with Daniels during a multi-unit drill years ago. She remembered how he joked about Rex being his silent soldier, and bragged that the dog could be made to ignore anything if told to. She offered to testify. Now, the case was no longer just about Emily. It was about what Rex had become, a symbol of obedience turned weapon. The debate wasn't about whether Rex bit someone. It was about the deeper bite. The bite of silence, of submission, of a system that conditioned living beings to serve without question. In the days following, the public began to see Rex differently. Not as the villain, not even as the hero, but as something far more tragic, a dog trapped in a world where loyalty was used as a shield for abuse. And at the center of it all stood Emily, her voice soft but steady, her question still hanging in the air. If he was a hero, why didn't he protect me? The courtroom was never the same after Emily's testimony. Her question echoed in every hallway, across every desk in the courthouse, and even beyond the state as the story began to spread. If he was a hero, why didn't he protect me? A child's voice had cracked through a wall, decades in the making, a wall built of uniforms, blind loyalty, and unchecked authority. The fourth day of the trial began with a heavier atmosphere. Court attendees seemed quieter, reporters more restrained, and even the defense attorneys less confident. Emily was scheduled for cross-examination. Most assumed the defense would tread lightly. She was, after all, a child. But they were also desperate. The only way to save Officer Daniels' reputation was to try and challenge Emily's version of events. Defense attorney Charles Bennett stepped toward the stand, his expression forced into a gentle smile. "Emily," he began, "you're very brave for coming here. But sometimes, when something scary happens, our memories can get mixed up. Do you think that's possible?" Emily blinked slowly. "I remember everything," she said, voice soft but firm. Bennett nodded as if expecting that. "And you're sure Officer Daniels told the dog not to bark?" She looked toward Rex, who now rested calmly beside his temporary handler. "Yes. He said it right before he pushed my mom. I heard him clearly." "And are you sure it wasn't a command to keep Rex from barking at something else? Maybe a noise outside?" Emily frowned slightly. "No. He looked right at Rex. He wasn't telling him to stay calm. He was telling him not to stop him." The courtroom fell silent again. Bennett glanced at the jury, but their expressions were unmoved. He tried again. "You've been through something very hard. But what if Rex didn't understand? What if he didn't know you were in danger?" Emily paused, then said something no one was ready for. "Then why didn't Rex protect me when he saw me crying? Dogs know when people are scared. My neighbor's dog does. He always barks when someone yells. But Rex just watched, like he wasn't allowed to care." It was a devastating line, not angry, not accusatory, but impossibly sincere. Bennett had no response. The judge called for a recess, allowing the room to breathe again. During the break, Sandra Carter hugged her daughter tightly outside the courtroom. "You're doing so good, baby," she whispered. Emily just nodded, eyes still fixed ahead. Already thinking about what she had to say next, reporters, though barred from speaking with Emily, scrambled to capture the emotion of the moment. The court's press area was abuzz. Social media lit up again, with hashtags like #ProtectTheInnocent and #RexTrial trending nationwide. Inside, Officer Daniels sat with his hands clasped and jaw clenched. It was clear Emily's words had reached him. But whether they had stirred guilt or just fear, no one could say. When court resumed, Emily was excused from the stand. The judge commended her bravery, and the jury offered a collective nod of respect as she returned to her seat beside her mother. The prosecution wasted no time, introducing their next witness, Corporal Julian Brooks, a retired canine handler who had worked with Daniels during his early years. Brooks, in his 60s now, walked with a limp from an injury in the field. He had nothing to gain from testifying. He was already retired, his pension secure. But he had seen the headlines and felt something was off. "I remember Daniels," Brooks said. "Ambitious, smart, but different." "How so?" asked the prosecutor. "He didn't treat Rex like a partner," Brooks replied. "He treated him like a tool. He once joked that Rex was his mute enforcer. Said it was better to have a dog that didn't bark too much. Said it kept people guessing. Did you ever report that?" Brooks nodded slowly. "I mentioned it to a superior. But Daniels was the department's golden boy at the time. They said I misunderstood." His testimony confirmed what Emily had described, that Rex had been shaped not just by standard police training, but by something more manipulative, more personal. After court adjourned that day, something extraordinary happened. Rex was led past the courtroom by his current handler, Officer Lila Hayes. Emily, standing nearby, asked quietly, "Can I pet him?" Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, he's safe now." Emily stepped forward, heart pounding, and knelt slowly. Rex looked at her, tail wagging just slightly. She reached out and placed a hand on his head. He leaned into it. "You're not bad," she whispered. "You were just listening to the wrong voice." Someone captured the moment from across the hallway. A photo of a little girl touching the head of the dog who had once frightened her. By the next morning, that image would be on front pages across the country. A symbol of innocence meeting. Obedience and forgiveness beginning where fear once lived. The trial wasn't over. But something had changed. Not just in the courtroom, but in the public, but in the hearts of people watching. Emily hadn't just told her story. She had shattered the silence that let it happen. By the 5th day of the trial, no one in the courtroom could pretend this was still about a single raid or an innocent mistake. What had started as a story of a police officer and his loyal dog had become a slow but powerful excavation of years. Of ignored warnings, buried complaints, and a system too afraid to question its own heroes. The prosecution now had momentum. What Emily began with her voice was being reinforced with hard evidence. They presented copies of internal complaints, redacted, but real. Officers had anonymously reported Daniel's behavior on several occasions, citing his use of intimidation. Tactics during arrests, especially when Rex was involved. One report, written over a year before the raid on Emily's house, read, "Officer Daniels appears to give contradictory K-9 commands." In one incident, the dog did not react to a civilian being shoved aggressively. This behavior suggests either poor training or deliberate instruction. The report was marked, "Reviewed." No action required. The courtroom sat in silence as document after document revealed the truth. This wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. A former department supervisor, reluctantly subpoenaed, admitted on the stand that Daniels had too much leeway. When asked why nothing was done, he answered with something that made the judge lean forward. He got results. He made arrests. The dog helped create compliance. And we didn't ask too many questions because, frankly, the city liked the numbers. The jurors were visibly shaken. One even wiped away tears when Emily was brought back to the courtroom and heard those words. She looked at her mother and whispered, "They knew." The prosecution's star moment came when an independent IT specialist took the stand with something unexpected: metadata. The department had provided files as required, but the data expert found tampered timestamps. One of the training videos Daniels submitted as proof of Rex's discipline had been edited. The original audio showed Daniels issuing multiple "stay silent" commands during simulated confrontations. The version previously submitted to Internal Affairs had those lines muted. Was it deliberate tampering? The prosecutor asked. Yes, the expert confirmed. The original audio was removed manually, and a replacement file was uploaded afterward. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge stared at Daniels with a look that spoke volumes. The defense scrambled to object, but had no valid challenge. Daniels was now unraveling. Still, the defense made one last effort to salvage something. They brought in a character witness, a fellow officer who'd once worked closely with Daniels. His testimony was meant to humanize the accused. Ryan was under pressure, he said. We all were. Crime rates were up. There was pressure from command to perform. Rex just followed orders, and Ryan did what he had to do to keep control. But even that defense fell flat. Did he ever abuse that control? The prosecutor asked. The witness hesitated, then said softly, "Sometimes I think." Yes. Outside the courtroom, the story had grown into a national discussion. News channels ran segments titled, "The Rex Case? Can Loyalty Go Too Far?" and "Who Protects Us from the Protectors?" Former K-9 handlers, police chiefs, and even psychologists weighed in. Emily's testimony had awakened something bigger than any one case in classrooms. Children discussed bravery in police academies. Instructors debated ethics. And in homes across the country, parents held their kids a little tighter, wondering what it truly meant to be protected. That night, Sandra Carter was interviewed for a primetime special. She didn't talk about lawsuits or headlines. She talked about Emily. She's always been quiet, Sandra said, but that night changed her. And when she decided to speak up, nothing could stop her. I didn't push her to testify. She asked me if she could. She said, if I don't say it, maybe he'll keep doing it to other kids. That's why we're here. And that was the heart of it. This trial wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was a plea, not just for justice, but for accountability. For the silence to finally be broken. Back in court, the final piece of evidence was quietly devastating. A recorded conversation between Daniels and a former colleague, captured during the investigation. In it, Daniels said, "They won't get me. It's just a kid and a dog. Who's going to believe them?" The courtroom sat frozen as the recording played. When it ended, no one spoke. Even Rex, lying near the bench, lifted his head and looked toward Daniels. Emily turned to her mother and asked, "Was he talking about me?" Sandra nodded slowly, but Emily didn't cry. She just whispered, "He was wrong." Officer Ryan Daniels walked into the courtroom on the 6th day of the trial with a visible shift in posture. The confidence he once carried, straight shoulders, firm steps, steady gaze, had vanished. His uniform had been replaced by a plain navy suit, and his eyes were sunken, as if he hadn't slept in days. The man who once proudly led Rex into high-risk raids was now the one under scrutiny, flanked by his defense team and avoided by his former colleagues. The prosecution had presented a mountain of evidence. Over the previous days, altered video, footage, buried complaints, questionable commands, and a powerful testimony from a child. The defense had few options left, and so they turned to what they hoped would save him, Daniels himself. That morning, Daniels took the stand. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began with what sounded like a carefully rehearsed tone. "I've served my community for over 15 years, he said. "I've made sacrifices, seen things most people never do. And I've always believed in protecting the innocent." He looked around the courtroom. His eyes landed briefly on Emily, who sat beside her mother, quietly coloring in a notebook with her bear tucked beside her. He quickly looked away. "I trained Rex to obey, yes," Daniels continued, "but I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I was doing what was necessary to control dangerous situations." Then came the question the prosecution had been waiting for. "Mr. Daniels," said Prosecutor Linda Merrow, standing to cross-examine, "do you remember the night of the Carter raid?" "Yes," he replied. "It was a bad call. Wrong address. It happens sometimes." "Did you give Rex the command to remain passive that night?" Daniels hesitated. "I gave him the standard stand down signal. That doesn't mean ignore. It means observe." "Did you use that command while pushing an unarmed woman and shouting in the presence of a child?" Daniels opened his mouth, then closed it. I didn't think she was unarmed at the time." "You didn't think a child on the floor was watching?" "I didn't think I was doing anything wrong," he said finally, voice rising slightly. The prosecution played the now infamous clip again, Daniels on body cam, barking orders, telling Rex to stay quiet, while Sandra was shoved against the wall and little Emily screamed. "Is that your voice?" the prosecutor asked. Daniels lowered his head. "Yes. And do you still believe you did nothing wrong?" The courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned slightly forward. Daniels exhaled slowly. "I believed I was following my training. But maybe the training was wrong." That sentence, delivered too late and too softly, was the closest thing to accountability he had ever offered. It wasn't enough. Later that afternoon, the jury was shown a pattern of similar behavior instances, where Daniels had used Rex in ways outside official K-9 protocol. Though none of those cases involved serious injury, the implications were damning. Daniels had a history of using fear, not justice, as his tool of enforcement. And Rex, the ever-loyal partner, had simply obeyed. Outside the courthouse, the media dubbed it the fall of the Golden Officer. His awards and public commendations were now viewed through a different lens. What once symbolized bravery now felt like shadows hiding the truth. Emily's photo, with Rex taken in the hallway days before, went viral again. This time, side by side with a photo of Daniels on the stand. The contrast was jarring. A child, calmly petting the dog she once feared, and the officer who had trained that fear into obedience, now visibly unraveling under the weight of truth. But perhaps the most heartbreaking moment came not from the jury, or the attorneys, or even Emily. It came from Rex himself. That evening, Officer Lila Hayes, now handling Rex during the trial, gave an interview. She described something strange that had happened during Daniel's testimony. Rex started whining quietly, she said. He wasn't in distress, but he recognized the voice. He looked toward the bench, then toward the door. Then he rested his head on my foot. I think he knew what was happening. Her words struck a nerve with the public. The realization settled in. Rex wasn't just a symbol. He was a living, breathing creature manipulated, trained, and used as a tool in something he never understood. His silence in the courtroom wasn't guilt. It was trauma. The department's Canine Oversight Division, under intense scrutiny, released a statement by evening, promising a full review of all past training, programs, command structures, and officer privileges related to K-9 units. It was the first time in years that the system admitted a flaw. Emily watched all of this unfold on the living room TV, beside her mom. Is it almost over? She asked. Almost, Sandra replied, brushing her hair. Will Rex be okay? Sandra smiled gently. I think he already is. Emily didn't say anything else. She just reached for her notebook and began to draw a picture of Rex standing beside a little girl holding a badge. She titled it, The Day the Dog Got Free. The day after Officer Daniels' cross-examination, the courtroom seemed quieter than usual, as though the building itself had absorbed the weight of the truth. The mood had shifted. What began as a controversial high-profile case had now grown into something deeper, an exploration of accountability, trust, and the true meaning of service. But while much of the courtroom focus remained on Daniels, many eyes began turning to Rex. He had been at the center of every moment, silent, observant, steady. He didn't growl, he didn't bark, but he was present, and for those paying attention, that meant everything. More people were beginning to ask, what happens to a dog who is trained to fear nothing, yet was never given permission to protect? Officer Lila Hayes, Rex's temporary handler, had grown attached to him. She was no stranger to police dogs, having trained several over her 12-year career. But something about Rex stood out. He's obedient to a fault, she told a local reporter during a brief recess. But there's more behind his eyes. He doesn't just follow, he waits. He watches people, like he's still deciding whether to trust them. Following Daniel's testimony, the judge granted a motion for Rex to be officially removed from his former handler's custody. Though Daniels remained on trial, the fate of Rex had to be addressed separately. The department would have to decide whether Rex could be retrained or if he would be permanently retired. That night, a special hearing was held behind closed doors, attended by Hayes, 2 senior trainers, a behavioral psychologist, and a representative from the department's legal division. They watched hours of footage. They read testimony. They examined Rex's behavior closely. Hayes spoke first. Rex doesn't show aggression, not even hesitation. He listens. But more importantly, I think he wants to change. The behavioral psychologist agreed. He shows high cognitive function and emotional awareness. That makes him unique. It also means he's capable of rehabilitation. After a 2-hour discussion, the panel voted unanimously. Rex would not be retired permanently. Instead, he would be placed into a specialized retraining program designed to help transition police dogs into service animals or therapy companions. The following day, Emily and Sandra were informed privately. At first, Emily didn't quite understand what it meant. Is he going back to the police? She asked. No, sweetheart, her mother said, smiling. He's getting a second chance. He's going to help people now, in a different way. Emily nodded slowly, then said, I want to see him again. They made arrangements. That weekend, Emily was taken to the rehabilitation center where Rex was beginning his transition. The space was open, filled with greenery, sunlight, and calm trainers using positive reinforcement. It was nothing like the high-stress police kennels Rex had once known. When he saw Emily, something changed in his stance. He didn't freeze. He didn't turn away. He gently padded toward her and sat down, his tail brushing against the floor. Emily knelt beside him. Her fingers brushed the fur near his ears. You remember me, she whispered. Rex leaned forward and licked her hand. Sandra, watching from the side, had to wipe her eyes. Trainer Melissa Owens stepped forward and explained, he's all ready, responding to emotional cues more openly. He recognizes safe people now. With time, he could be certified as a therapy dog, maybe even one who helps kids like Emily. Emily's eyes lit up. Like me? Yes, Owen smiled. Exactly. Like you. It was the start of something beautiful. Over the next few weeks, Rex continued his transformation. He learned how to respond to emotional distress, how to offer comfort instead of control, how to be gentle instead of alert. He was praised for every kind gesture, and he thrived. When word of Rex's retraining reached the media, the public responded with overwhelming support. The dog who had once symbolized silent fear now represented something else: redemption. Hashtags changed. Hashtag silent soldier faded. Hashtag healing hero rose in its place. Donations poured into the center that housed Rex, allowing them to expand their program, to take in more retired K-9 South, especially those from high-stress or controversial deployments. And Emily? She became a quiet ambassador. She was invited to speak at a national conference on child trauma and police reform, where she simply said, I didn't want Rex to be punished. I just wanted people to listen. He wasn't bad. He was just trained the wrong way. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. Back home, Emily received a package from the rehabilitation center, a framed photo of her and Rex during that first visit. Alongside it was a certificate naming her honorary partner in healing. She placed it on her shelf, next to her favorite books. Later that night, Sandra tucked her in and asked if she was scared anymore. Emily shook her head. Not anymore. Because someone finally listened. And in a quiet kennel 2 towns away, Rex curled up on a soft blanket, not under orders, not waiting for a command, but finally resting. Free. The final day of the trial arrived beneath a gray Denver sky, the air heavy with tension and quiet expectation. Reporters, community leaders, and everyday citizens crowded the courthouse lawn, watching live streams, holding signs, whispering theories. No one quite knew how the verdict would land, but everyone knew it wouldn't end the way it started. Inside the courtroom, the jurors filed in with expressions that had changed over the course of 8 harrowing days. They had come face to face with a story that blurred every line between obedience and abuse, protection and power, justice and silence. Emily sat between her mother and a court-appointed counselor. She wore the same yellow dress as the day she first took the stand, a small but deliberate choice. Her stuffed bear rested on her lap, just like before, and she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Rex wasn't there that day. The court had excused him after the 6th day. He had earned his peace. He was now 2 weeks into his new life, already working with a therapist who specialized in children recovering from trauma. He was learning to listen, not for commands, but for emotions. Judge Hamilton called the court to order. Daniels sat, motionless as the clerk rose. In the matter of State versus Ryan Daniels, the clerk began on the charges of misconduct, abuse of authority, and obstruction of canine protocol. We find the defendant guilty on all counts. Gasps filled the courtroom. Daniels didn't move. He didn't flinch. His shoulders slumped slightly, like a man who finally felt the weight of his own shadow. The judge looked down at him over his glasses. Mr. Daniels, this court recognizes your years of service, but it also recognizes the lives damaged by your decisions. You used a symbol of loyalty to instill fear. You silenced a voice that was meant to protect. The badge is not a shield from truth. Sentencing will proceed in 2 weeks. Until then, you are remanded into custody. A hush fell over the courtroom. No applause. No outrage. Just quiet acceptance. Sandra squeezed Emily's hand. The little girl didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her justice had never been about punishment. It had been about being heard. And now she finally was. Outside, microphones crowded toward the courthouse steps, but neither Sandra nor Emily made a statement. They exited quietly through a side door, escorted by the same officer who once testified against Daniels. He knelt to Emily and said, "You're braver than half the men I've worked with." Emily nodded and whispered, "I just told the truth." In the following days, the story reached every corner of the country. Editorials debated its implications. Police departments nationwide began reviewing their canine programs. A few canceled public canine demos. Others began rewriting training procedures altogether. One major department even issued a public apology for a past raid eerily similar to the Carter's case that had never gone to trial, but now was being reopened. The ripple effects were undeniable, but it wasn't all tension. Some stories brought hope. A little girl in Ohio who had been afraid of dogs since witnessing a violent arrest saw Emily's photo with Rex. Her mother reported that the child finally pet their neighbor's golden retriever after saying, "If she can do it, maybe I can too." A retired officer in Texas started a nonprofit to retrain retired police dogs into therapy companions for veterans and children. He named the foundation Rex's Second Chance. Emily, meanwhile, returned to her normal life with grace. Her school gave her a quiet welcome, the teachers careful not to overwhelm her. But some classmates handed her cards that said things like, "You are really strong, and Rex is lucky to know you." One afternoon, she stood before her class during sharing time and said, "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but sometimes kids can help fix them." No one laughed. They just nodded. The Carter home grew quieter too. Jordan had started smiling again. Sandra joined a local parent coalition for justice reform and helped others file their own reports. What had once been their darkest memory had become their reason to stand taller. And as for Rex, he passed his first emotional support evaluation 2 weeks after the trial ended. His trainers praised his gentleness, his patience, and his rare intuition. He didn't react to loud sounds anymore. He leaned into children who were crying. He walked gently beside those who flinched at footsteps. And one sunny Saturday, he visited a youth trauma center in Boulder. Emily was there waiting. They let her help lead him into the main playroom, where 3 kids hesitantly sat on beanbags. Rex looked at them, then slowly lay down in the middle of the room, tail wagging lightly. After a long pause, one of the kids crawled forward and placed a hand on his back. That was all it took. The room filled with cautious laughter, light conversation, and something else that had once felt impossible. Healing. As the session ended, Emily hugged Rex tight and whispered into his ear, "You're not just a good dog now. You're my hero, too." And this time, he barked just once, soft and clear.